Everybody. Welcome to Food Safety Fundamentals from Food Focus. You're speaking or you're listening to Adele, and I am just making sure as everybody is coming into the meeting room that you've got a cup of coffee ready to share this Friday fundamentals with us.
Okay, so today we said we would do sort of 10 tips around internal auditing, and then I started writing them down, and it got too many to be 10. So we then decided, well, maybe we should do the ABCs because that gives us a few more opportunities to share information. So we've broken it down into the ABCs of internal food safety auditing. What's important to bear in mind is that the principles that we're going to talk about for auditing are not only for food safety, they're actually for any kind of management systems audit. But today we're really focusing on how you have to manage your food safety audits. So first of all, when we're talking about something, we need to make sure we understand what we're talking about. And so it's very important that we define what an internal audit is. What is this activity that many of the food safety management systems require us to do? So it's a requirement, it's a criteria of the standards that we have to comply with. But what does it actually mean? So this is the official ISO definition of an internal audit. It's a systematic, independent, and documented process. In this process, we obtain objective evidence and we evaluate that evidence objectively to determine the extent to which the audit criteria are fulfilled. So there's a couple of key words here. First of all, it's a process. So a process is obviously a number of steps that have to be followed in order to produce an outcome. When we have a process, we have an input and then we have an output to that process. So the important thing I want you to bear in mind is that auditing requires several steps that must be done systematically in order to achieve a repeatable outcome. In order to conduct an audit, there has to be criteria. So there has to be a reference point, there has to be a standard, there has to be rules of the game. So I always use the analogy of refereeing a sports game. You can't take a ref from a rugby game and expect him to be able to be an effective ref for a soccer game. The problem being is that although he knows how to blow the whistle, he doesn't know what the rules are for the game. He doesn't understand the criteria. And if you don't understand the criteria, you cannot audit effectively. So when we conduct an audit, we must know what are we measuring the department, the process, the product against. What are the rules? What is the criteria for the audit? And then the last point, which is absolutely critical, and that is that all audits are evidence-based. Audits must produce a list of evidence that can support a result. If you say your food safety management system is functioning effectively, what evidence did you review in order to come to this conclusion? Now, evidence should be verifiable. In other words, if I took the same evidence you looked at, I would come to the same conclusion. Now, evidence is often the area where you get frustrated with the external auditor because you feel that when they come in, this auditor looks at cleaning, for example, and finds a problem, and the next auditor finds something different. How can they be so different? Well, it's all based on the evidence that they select. If we took two auditors and gave them the same evidence, they should come to the same conclusion, which means that when you've conducted the audit, you need to produce the evidence so that we can confirm we would have come to the same results. And we'll talk about this in more detail when we talk about preparing for the audit. So now if we break it down into English, we would say it's an independent check to ensure that you are doing what you say you should be doing and that what you're doing is effective in managing food safety. So independence is important, and we're going to come back to this point when we look at auditor training. We want to check whether we're doing what we said we should be doing. In other words, If there's a procedure that says we have to wear certain PPE before we're going into the high-risk area, and there's a change process that has to be followed, then my audit would check that we are following the procedure that we said we should be doing. If it says I must wash my hands before I put my hairnet on, or it says I must wash my hands after I put my hairnet on, I would make sure that I'm actually following the procedure in the correct way. And I would need to do that across the organization to make sure that everyone is doing it in the correct way, because otherwise what we've written down will not be effective in managing food safety. So it's an easier way to understand what the definition actually means. Now, Adele, you've conducted many internal audits for companies that you've worked in and companies that you've worked with. Why don't you tell us a little bit about why we should take the process of internal auditing very seriously?
Yes, Linda, for me, I get very excited about this specific topic because for me, an internal audit is really something that is beneficial. It's something that helps you to improve your system. And for me, the improvement part is so important because in that way, every time you do an internal audit, you are actually, helping your team to understand your system better. You will then also see if everybody is understanding the why and the what of your system. And through that, the internal audit helps you to become audit fit. So therefore, when you get your external audits, it's not such a big shock for the team and everybody seeing this person asking questions, because your team has been going through it all the time. And I honestly feel if you focus and do your internal audits correctly, it will, at the end of the day, your return on investment will come when it's your time for the external audit, that it will reduce the time from the external auditor side. And the bargain of the internal audit is it's helping you to make sure that there's no surprises for management and for everybody in terms of the external auditor coming in and having findings. So I really feel the energy and the excitement of an internal audit is it's all about improvement, making your system better.
Absolutely. And I think the word that Adele uses about excitement, energy, passion, if you're the person who's responsible for managing the internal audits, that's got to come from you. You've got to be the person who makes people excited about this process. And you know what? An audit can actually be fun. It doesn't mean we don't take it seriously, but it means that we can actually make this activity something that people look forward to, not something that they dread. Adele also mentioned something really important about no surprises. And I think bullet point number 4 is the one that you should really highlight. The audit, an internal audit, should be much more rigorous than an external audit. You need to ask yourself questions every time your external audit finding is raised. Why did I miss it? How did we miss this? Because we should be finding the problems before the external auditor arrives. We should know where the weaknesses are in our own system rather than being surprised by an external audit. I tell senior managers to put a lot more emphasis and support and commitment behind internal audits, because we know where we hide our problems. The external auditor may be very experienced. They may know a lot about the process that they're auditing, but you know where you hide your problems. And an external audit, or rather an internal audit, should definitely identify those problems. Okay, so let's get into the process of internal auditing, because remember it said that it's a systematic, independent process. So to start the process, we need a few things to be in place. First of all, we need you to have the authority to conduct the process. Now, this is very important. Authority is different from responsibility. So you've all got the responsibility, I'm sure, to implement an internal audit program, but has management given you the authority and support to implement this program. Now, what does this look like? Well, if you decide that audits are going to take place once a year and you schedule these audits, you expect managers, even though they may be more senior to you, to abide by the audit schedule. Now, of course, we have to make sure that we are, appropriate and we are being respectful, and we consult them as to what would be appropriate and when would be the right time. But once that audit schedule is put in place, your authority must ensure that those audits happen. And you need to be able to ensure and to report back to top management if things don't go the way that they should be going. You will also need to direct and give instructions to the team of internal auditors that you may have in your company. I think Adele and I would probably say our best internal audit programs have been where you have cross-auditing. In other words, where you've got a representative from each department and they audit one another, as opposed to you auditing all the areas. And we'll come back to the number of auditors shortly. But you've got to be able to give people instructions. You've got to be able to ask them to complete reports by a certain time. So although they may not report to you in terms of line function, you still need organizational authority if this process is going to work effectively. The second thing is you always need 2 auditors or more. Why? Well, it's got to be independent. So who's going to audit you? So you've got to have at least 2 auditors. But I don't have auditors. Maybe I'm a one-man band. Well, then this is the ideal opportunity for you to bring in an external consultant who will then conduct the audit on your behalf. That person will give the independence to areas in the system that you are directly involved in. Okay, so please remember, auditors must be you plus 1. There should be a procedure for conducting audits. This procedure could be a process flow. It doesn't have to necessarily be a documented procedure, but you need to actually have the methodology by which the audits are conducted. How do we schedule them? How often do we conduct the audits? Do we have an opening meeting? What documentation do we use? How do we make sure corrective action is taken? So all of the requirements of the standard around internal auditing should be formalized. This procedure should be agreed with top management, and then everyone in the company should actually be trained on the procedure so they know what to expect from an internal audit. We've got to plan these audits. So there's 2 types of planning. There's the big picture planning, which we would say is the program of audits. What are we going to audit when? Now, this is really up to you. You decide how many audits you conduct a year. The minimum you will be able to get away with would be 1 audit in 12 months. But trust me, that's not nearly enough. You need to do many, many more internal audits than external audits. But when do I audit? Where do I audit? Who's going to conduct the audit? What are we going to audit during a particular audit? All of those things need to actually be put onto a program and shared with the company. Now, you should decide what you audit and how frequently you audit things based on the status and the importance of that activity. In other words, we use a risk-based audit approach. You might find that receiving is working really well. They're following the procedures, they've got checks and balances. Every time you go there, everything's running well. However, when you go to dispatch, completely different story. The guys are never doing what they're supposed to be doing, and the system is weak in dispatch. What that should tell you is your audit program should place more emphasis on dispatch than on receiving. Take the time you would have spent on receiving and rather put it into audits for dispatch. Because until those guys are functioning the way they should be and the system is healthy, you are at risk as an organization. So you should decide how you're going to conduct the audit based on the status and importance. Bear in mind, you need to audit everything. If you've got 15 cleaning procedures for pieces of equipment within your facility, you need to audit every one of those procedures at least once in 12 months. Those are the things you're supposed to be doing. So you need to maybe break it down into more specific what we're going to audit than just say we're going to audit cleaning. Is it possible to audit all 15 cleaning procedures in one audit? Maybe not, in which case you'd need to split it up so that every audit that you do on cleaning, you systematically review the procedures for cleaning, and by the end of the year, you can show you did actually audit the compliance with all 15 of those procedures. You then also need management commitment. The thing about auditing is the manager for an area should make themselves available for the audit, and then they're going to have to take responsibility for corrective action. So you need commitment, and if you don't have that commitment, you need to be able to take it up the chain to top management in order to force the commitment in some cases. When it comes to performing the process, the important thing is we need competent auditors. This is a new skill. This is not something that comes naturally to everyone. Not everyone likes to almost, be asking their colleagues questions and I don't want to say critiquing, but assessing processes. It doesn't suit everybody's personalities, and people also need to know the criteria. If you don't know what's in the Meat Safety Act, how on earth can you audit against the Meat Safety Act? You need to know the criteria, you need training, and then you need training in the techniques of auditing. How do I effectively interview somebody? How do I effectively write a non-conformance? Because it's not something that just comes naturally. There is a very good standard called ISO 19011. It's the standard for how to conduct audits. In fact, it's a guidance document, but it's really a very, very good document on how audits should be conducted. If you don't have a copy, please make sure you get a copy from the SABS. You would buy SANS ISO 19011 to save yourself a lot of money. Download the document and then use that as the basis for your internal auditing program. It's jam-packed full of great ideas, great tips, as well as process requirements that you should take into account. Now, Del, you've had challenges with not so much the hard skills, but the softer skills. What do you mean by communication, conflict management? How do you find these softer skills impact on the auditor?
Yes, Lynn, for me, sometimes it's difficult for them to communicate when there is tension or when there is, difference in seniority levels, because the internal auditor may be a person now auditing one of the managers. So there's an immediate feel of, this is actually my boss. How am I going to do this? So with communication, it's so important for me that the person that's going to be the internal auditor must be able to communicate with authority and understand that the communication within this role that you are playing as the internal auditor is at the end of the day for the betterment and for managing the risks that can be there for the company. So communication is something that we do it every day, but if you have some extra help of understanding how to, the conflict management, when you are listening skills, and if there's a difference in understanding a point, I just feel all of that extra tips and guidelines and the softer skills to support an internal auditor, to get training on that is also very, very important for me.
Absolutely. And I think what's important here is people need to perceive or need to understand that you're not a whistleblower as such. And so although you're assessing a system, and there will be situations where you have to report to top management that people are not doing or not following procedures that they're supposed to be, you are there as part of the team to improve the systems. And so in identifying areas that are not conforming to the requirements, we're actually protecting the company and we're protecting our jobs. The other thing about an internal auditor is you're not always right. So yes, you may know the system and you may know the standard better than anyone else in the company, but you're not always right, and you don't always understand how people do their jobs, and you don't always understand the details around their processes. You may have worked in QC, you really know how QC functions, but you've never worked in dispatch. You don't understand the challenges that they face, and so just be reminded that you're not always right. It's important when you're auditing to listen and to understand what the other person is doing. And then, of course, you need to be independent. So the important thing here is that you need to be aware of potential conflicts of interest. Like Adele said, it's quite hard to audit your boss. It's quite hard to audit your family. It's quite hard to audit your friends. And, you know, we develop relationships within companies. And those situations can make it very difficult for you to actually conduct an effective internal audit. And those are areas where that other auditor can then be much more effective and assist when it comes to the independence aspect. So how do we perform the process of auditing? Well, remember, it's a process. So again, there's a number of steps we have to go through, and we've done the planning. We know when we're going to audit, what we're going to audit. Now we have to consider the preparation for a specific audit. So we've decided tomorrow we're all going down to dispatch, and we're going to be auditing in dispatch. So we know where we're auditing, and we know that we're going to the function of dispatch. But what are we going to audit when we get to dispatch? What are the things that are important within dispatch that we need to look at? Now, we can understand that there are certain aspects of their process that we need to look at. How do they load a truck? How do they make sure the truck's clean? I'm sure there's a few procedures that they have to follow. There's some checks that they have to do before they load the carcasses onto the truck, for example. So we have to make sure that we are thinking ahead about what we're going to check. You can't prepare for something when you're there. You have to make sure that you've done it before you get there. When you arrive in the department, we have a plan of action. Where are we going to start? What questions are we going to look at? What documents are we going to request? We have to have a plan of action. Now, what's important about your checklist, because you should prepare for the audit and you should show evidence you've prepared, is it's not a checklist where you have ticks and crosses. Ticks and crosses don't help at all. Remember, it's an evidence-based approach. So you want to force yourself to write down information that you've checked as part of that audit process. In other words, the procedure for cleaning, you may look right on your checklist, review procedure for cleaning. Now you're going to have to prove that you did that. So what was the procedure name? What was the procedure number? What was the reference number? What was the revision number for that procedure? Because if I looked at a different procedure, could I come to a different result? The answer is yes, but remember, the audit's got to be repeatable. We've got to be able to repeat the results. So you've got to tell me which document you looked at, so that if you identified any problems with that document, if I followed your footsteps, I would come to the same conclusion. In other words, the audit is repeatable. So this is an area where many novice internal auditors make mistakes. They don't write down evidence. They just have ticks and crosses. And that's not auditing. That's just checking something. But that's not the process that we follow. We follow a much more in-depth process. You do a check to make sure that someone's wearing their hairnet correctly. But that's not the process of internal auditing. If I'm looking at hairnets, I will want to understand from the person I'm talking to, why do we wear a hairnet? Show me how you put the hairnet on to make sure that they follow the procedure correctly. It's not ticking to check that everyone's wearing hairnets. It's interrogating the process and the understanding of why we do things to be effective for food safety. Now, you wouldn't like someone just walking into your office and start, picking up things and sort of, writing down information without at least introducing themselves. And that's what we call an opening meeting. if we're going into dispatch, the first thing we're going to do is find the dispatch supervisor and tell him or her that we're there for the audit. They should know in advance, although with internal audits, we don't always have to notify them. They can be unannounced audits, because at the end of the day, we should always be ready to be doing the right things. But you at least announce yourself and you tell them what you're going to do, how long you're going to be there, and you invite them to be with you, because it just makes the next step so much easier. Now we're going to go and collect objective evidence. We're going to go and look at documents. We're going to go and observe. We're going to go and interview people to determine whether or not the dispatch function is working the way that it's supposed to. Now, the outcome of that audit will be findings. We will find evidence. We will find evidence that they're doing the right thing. Hopefully a lot of that, because that's the point. We want to make sure our system is working properly, but we may find things that need attention. We will tell the dispatch supervisor what we found. So you should never leave an area with a whole bunch of notes having not discussed that with the person who's responsible for that area. Nobody likes to get a report where they were not made aware of issues beforehand. There's nothing secret about the audit results, and so you should communicate those verbally before you go back to your office and start working on the report. At the closing meeting, we will also talk about corrective action. This is what I found, this is what you need to do, and this is how we're going to go about fixing the problems. And bearing in mind, the auditor is not responsible for corrective action. That should be with the dispatch supervisor or the distribution manager, whoever is responsible and accountable for the area. But we should discuss it and make sure that they're on the right track. We can then prepare a report, which is the final written results of the audit, which will then be distributed. And then chances are you're going to have to come back and do a re-audit. In other words, you're going to have to audit what you found the last time to make sure they've taken the appropriate corrective action. It's called closing the loop. And we always do it because sometimes people intend to fix a problem, but they forget about it. They get busy and they actually never solve the challenge. That's why we always go back and re-audit to assess that the corrective action was effective. Now, objective evidence is a very important term. And like I said, auditors don't use ticks and crosses. Auditors use evidence. So generally, these would be records, statements of fact. I can have evidence where someone stated that this is how the process works. It doesn't always have to be written down. If we all work that way and I state that this is how something is done, that evidence would be admissible in court. My verbal statement is considered adequate evidence. Of course, written evidence supports my verbal statement, but not everything is written down in our companies. Many things are done just because we know that that's the way that they should be done and people are trained correctly. What's important is that it should be verifiable. In other words, I should be able to go and ask someone else the same question and they'll give me the same stated evidence. Does that make sense to you? So it's not just one witness, it's two witnesses then that are verifying a verbal statement. If there's a procedure that says this is how you clean the bowl cutter, then I would verify that what I'm seeing and what people are doing works in accordance with the criteria. In other words, the procedure says they're supposed to do these things, and when I observe the practice, when I talk to them about how they do it, their verbal statement confirms that they're following the procedure. Remember, just having a cleaning checklist doesn't confirm that I followed the procedure. Unfortunately, our food safety management systems are plagued with a tick infestation. So we need to still confirm that somebody understands how to clean the bowl cutter. What are the steps that they have to follow? Not just look that they ticked the cleaning checklist. The evidence-based approach to auditing means that we will come to a reliable and reproducible audit conclusion. Remember what I said, if I took the same evidence and I followed in your footsteps, I'd come to the same conclusion. They're not rinsing the bowl cutter adequately. You saw it. I asked the same questions. I looked at the same procedure. We came to the same conclusion. They're not following the procedure correctly. We need to take action because rinsing means that we don't have any chemical residues before we introduce a new product. Now, how do I gather this evidence? Well, these are really the tools that I have in my auditor toolbox. The first thing is you're going to open your eyes. So if someone's cleaning the bowl cutter, you're going to watch them clean the bowl cutter. You're going to observe exactly how it gets done. You don't even have to ask a single question. You can just observe the process with the cleaning procedure, and you'll be able to see if they're not following the cleaning procedure in the correct way. Now, sometimes they might do something that's a bit different from the procedure, in which case I need to ask a question. Why are you doing that? Why haven't you used this cleaning chemical? When did you change to this cleaning chemical? That's called interviewing, and it's called, I suppose, interrogating what you saw to understand and to clarify why things are done differently or in a particular way. We can then also look at the documentation. So ideally, I would then have the procedure for cleaning and be following it step by step as I watch the cleaner go through the processes. But we can just do that on our own. In other words, I can check that the cleaning procedure meets all the requirements of the standard. It's got the time, it's got the residence time for disinfectants, it's got what cleaning equipment. In other words, it's written correctly. That's important because we don't want people to use documents that are not written correctly, but just writing something correctly doesn't mean it will be followed correctly. So I need to check it's written correctly, but then I need to observe the process to make sure that people are following that document correctly. And then I can also look at records. So a cleaning procedure should result in a cleaning record. So I can then look at the cleaning records that should show that the bowl cutter is cleaned every day or after every batch to confirm that we're doing it in the correct way. But I won't only use the records. I will use that in combination with observing and with interviewing. Now, I want you to think of this almost as a triangle. So when you look at evidence, you should have at least two sides of the triangle, preferably three. In other words, I will read the document, read the procedure, make sure it is correct, observe the processes, and interview the person. And if you do use all three sides of the triangle, you will have conducted an effective internal audit on cleaning of the bowl cutter. If you're only using one side of the triangle, be very careful. It's not an effective audit. People can lie, documents can be incorrect, and so you need to make sure that what you read is supported with observation or interviewing, and interviewing should be supported with records of how something was done. So always two sides of the triangle. If you can get a full triangle, that's even the best. Now, what's the audit outcome? In reviewing the document, in watching the cleaner clean the bowl cutter, it's all done correctly. Amazing. We're following our own procedures. Isn't that what you want? Isn't that what we're supposed to be doing? So internal audits are really there to confirm we're doing what we said we should be doing. So non-conformances should be the exception, not the rule. Now, what often happens is we only focus on the non-conformance, which can make auditing such a negative process. You're always seeing the glass half empty. Can't you see the glass half full just for once? So why don't you do an internal audit where you congratulate the guys on all their conformances to motivate them to build a positive food safety culture? Yes, we have to highlight non-conformances because they can impact on the safety of our product, but try focusing on the positive, not just the negative, because it can become very demotivating for your colleagues. There may also be opportunities for improvement. So they're doing something, but they could be doing it so much better. And ideally, these opportunities for improvement should come from the floor. In your discussions with the operators, there should always be a question to say, guys, what do you think we can do better? And why don't you, as the quality person, actively take some of those opportunities and try and make them happen by moving the rack where we store the cleaning equipment to an area which is more convenient for the cleaners and doesn't pose a risk to food safety? By just doing it and just hearing them and just trying to help them in their process, that can win you so much ground as far as food safety is concerned, because it just shows that their input is valuable and you listening, you're not just giving instructions. Sometimes as quality managers, we have to remember we don't know everything about everything, and actually our role is also to support people to do their jobs better. Now, there are different audit types. This is very, very important because many people get stuck on one kind of audit and they don't assess their system properly. If I come in as an external auditor, I don't know, let's use Intertech as an example, or ProCert, they come in to conduct an FSSC or a BRC audit on your company. That's what's known as a systems audit. They're there with the standard, and their job is to make sure that you complete, or you conform rather, to all the criteria of that standard. They have to go through every single section in FSSC. They've got to make sure that all the requirements of ISO 22000, all 10 sections are audited, plus the PRPs, plus the additional requirements of FSSC. This is a very high-level audit because they have a lot to cover, and they have to make sure that if the standard says you need a food safety policy, you have one. Now, once you've got a food safety policy, do I need to audit that section again? Well, you should check that the policy is no longer out of date, but you do understand that once you've implemented that policy, once you've written it and implemented it, and you confirm that it's there and it has been reviewed, that's kind of as much as you're going to get out of that section of the standard. So we have to be very careful that we don't spend too much time auditing like the certification body, because it often is not enough depth for a proper internal audit. Another example, have you got a procedure for customer complaints? Yes, we do. Here's the procedure, here's the records. Again, that's how they would audit, to make sure that the process is in place and that the system is functioning. We would need to dig a lot deeper to make sure that every single customer complaint has been closed correctly and all the appropriate changes have been made. So I would say look at a systems audit once a year, where you make sure that all the bases are covered, all the requirements as per the standard are put in place. But if you're only doing systems audits, we're missing out on very important activities where we need to dig deep as internal auditors. And these are rather procedure or process audits, where you need to be focusing a lot more attention. So this focuses on the implementation. So like I said, how to clean the mixing bowl. And here I'm literally looking at every single step in that procedure and making sure that that procedure is audited correctly. How do we load the truck? I'm taking that procedure and I'm focusing in detail on how we follow that procedure, and I'm observing it, and I'm interviewing, and I'm checking every shift, and I'm asking every operator to make sure that there are no weak areas in how that procedure is followed. A systems audit would confirm you have the procedure and you have trained people on it. And maybe the external auditor would have time to observe some procedures, but they don't have time to observe them all. So that's what you're supposed to be doing, because they're your procedures, it's your system. Now, sometimes people say or call this kind of activity a planned job observation. That's exactly what it is. I'm watching an operator perform a job in accordance with the procedure. I can use this for a number of things. One could be to confirm that the person is effectively trained. So an audit can actually be checking effectiveness of training. Of course it can. If you've got planned job observations and audits, why are you duplicating that activity? You could do the same activity and come out with two different outcomes. Remember what I said, check all operators, check all shifts. Lots of things happen on night shift, and we very rarely audit night shift. Why not? Why don't we audit night shift? Because that's when things can go wrong. Now, we could do a process audit, slightly different. Here, for example, I could audit the process of pest control. In other words, I'm going to look at pest control around our whole facility. I'm going to go and check a sample of bait boxes. I'm going to go and check the lights, the insecticutors. I'm going to go and check the file. So I'm just auditing pest control, not looking at anything else. Today, I'm just auditing the process of pest control. That allows me to do it properly, as opposed to quick check, and then there's a non-conformance. What's the process of approving a supplier? Now, this one could cut across a number of different departments. I'm not just in purchasing. I've got to go to the guy that buys. I've got to go to the lab. I've got to check that the tests were done on the raw material. I've got to make sure that we are actually buying from that supplier. I've got to go to receiving and check what product we have from that supplier. So a process audit normally involves more than one area. So you can't plan the audit to only be in purchasing, because you may have to walk around other areas, chat to other people, because the processes may run across several departments. Product audits are focusing on a particular product, a day in the life of the product. So I could go to raw material store and I could choose an ingredient. I don't know, let's take cinnamon, for example. And I decide I'm going to follow the use of this batch of cinnamon throughout the organization. So I take it from the receiving records, and then I want to see all the batches where we use that cinnamon. So it's almost like a mock traceability study, but you're not just collecting records. You're looking at what happened when this batch was actually used. I could start the other end. I could go to the final product storage area. I could choose a batch, and then I could trace that product all the way back to its ingredients. I'm not just tracing records. I'm actually looking at every single procedure that was carried out in order to make this product. Now, realistically speaking, that audit could probably take you the whole day. But trust me, you're going to find a whole bunch of things about those processes. It's a very interesting audit, and it's a very effective audit. Make sure you do it at least twice a year. Now, many of us just default to the last audit, a GMP audit. That's not effective, because that's actually just a housekeeping inspection. You're walking around and you're checking that the floors are clean and the walls are clean, but that's not auditing. That's only using one side of the triangle. How do we know that people are properly trained to keep the floor clean? Have you checked the cleaning equipment to make sure that it's properly maintained? Do you know that people understand which cleaning equipment to use, when to use that cleaning equipment? So housekeeping inspections are important, but if you go now and look at your audit reports and all you've done is raise findings about housekeeping, that is a sure sign you are not conducting internal audits correctly. And that's when you need to change your kinds of audits to make sure that you've got different audits assessing different processes within your system. So don't throw out the GMP audits. Do those, but don't only do those, because you will definitely find problems during your external audits. Okay, so mix it up a little, make it interesting. When you program your audits, add a few of these different ones, to try and just give yourself some variety, but most importantly, to aggressively review your system in different ways to make sure that it's effective. Now, there's a couple of things you shouldn't do. Okay, so like Adele said, be careful not to avoid a conflict situation. So you'd rather not audit something because it's like a no-go zone. Every time you bring it up, someone loses their temper. Just because somebody is aggressive, or just because somebody's got a very, defined opinion about something, doesn't mean they're right. You've got to actually look for the problem areas, and those need to be resolved. Be careful that you don't fall into the same trap that frustrates you with an external audit. So an external auditor, by definition, cannot tell you how to fix the problem. It's called a conflict of interest. But often we get frustrated because they don't explain the problem accurately or adequately, so we don't really know what we need to fix. You don't behave like that on an internal audit. Although you're independent of dispatch, the internal audit is about improvement. You're part of a team. If the guy doesn't understand what he has to fix, he won't fix it. So you need to take time to explain the finding. And that's why we often say audits are a training exercise. You're actually using the time to make sure that the people in the department understand what they're supposed to be doing and how to do it in the correct way. So spend the time, go the distance, make sure that they understand what they need to fix. But you never take responsibility for corrective action. It's not up to you to make sure that the temperature controllers in the cold store are calibrated. That's up to the person who's responsible for that area. So you can make sure they understand what to do, how to do it, who can help them with it, but the corrective action is never yours. But you must be prepared to facilitate the root cause analysis. Often people don't take the time to fully understand why did something go wrong. And if they don't understand why, they won't fix the right thing. And then you might pick up the problem again. So don't just say, well, use the 5 whys, and then you'll know what the root cause is. Many people find that tool very difficult to understand. Your role can facilitate their understanding of the root cause, and you should do it. And then you should say, okay, guys, now you know what the problem is. Off you go and fix it. Don't take responsibility for that final step. But please, you're on the same team, so make sure that you do help them to understand what they need to fix. So I spoke to my friends who are out there auditing for certification bodies. They've done thousands and thousands of audits, and I asked them for some tips. So coming into land for today's Friday Fundamentals, let's look at what some of them would suggest. Well, first of all, my friend Rika says that you need to make sure that you actually assess the planned arrangements. In other words, what you're saying is you need to compare what you see happening with what you've read in a procedure. So my example with the bowl cutter, you've actually got the procedure, you're watching the operator cleaning, you are comparing what is supposed to happen with what is happening on the floor. She says when she stands still and does that, she can understand and truly evaluate whether a process is being done correctly. It also shows you when people are taking shortcuts, when they're doing something that they're not supposed to be doing. How else will you find whether the procedures are actually being complied with? Rika's advice also is always find something right before you find something wrong. Write down conformance before you write down non-conformance. Be quick to tell the guys, well done. This has been done exactly the way we want it to be done. This is so good. This is so good for food safety. Before you start telling them what they're not doing. Why? Well, because we want to encourage them to continue doing the right thing. If they feel that they've worked so hard, you know how this feels. You work for weeks before the external audit, and if they only tell you about the negative things, it feels very demotivating because of the amount of effort that you've actually put into it. Zurika says, be pedantic. In other words, what she's saying is don't compromise on the detail when it's necessary. So let's think about this. When it comes to a metal detector, when we do the checks for a metal detector, they have to be done in a very specific way in order to ensure that the metal detector is functioning the correct way. We can't compromise here. And so if the operator is only checking 2 points and not 3 points, that's not good enough. We actually have to write that down. We can't give people brownie points for effort for food safety in some cases, particularly when it has a direct impact on the safety of the product. So for example, if I'm auditing critical control points, if I'm auditing control points, you don't compromise, and we have to be pedantic in those areas, because if we're not, someone could actually get sick. I chatted to Debbie, and Debbie said, always plan, because if you don't plan what you're going to audit, it becomes a social gathering. You land up having a cup of coffee and a chat with the distribution manager. You don't actually land up auditing. So when you arrive, what are you going to start with? What are you going to check? You need to have a plan. Del, you want to add to that?
Yes, yeah, for me it's very important, Lynn. Everything that you've said thus far is, I think what's critical, an internal audit can't be done in a day. You can't say, okay, today I'm doing an internal audit on my system. As you've mentioned, all the different types of audits and that, it has to be a planned thing throughout the year. And, with an external audit, the auditor will always say, their findings are based on a snapshot. An internal audit is not a snapshot. It's definitely not just, okay, I'm just going to look at something small. It's like you've said in all the points that you've mentioned, it's that really going in, looking at all the finer details. And like you said there, the comment that Rika made as well, for me, I strongly feel internal audit is something that can also build your food safety culture. Because
Absolutely.
constantly throughout that process, you're making the people aware why we're doing it, what we're doing it, focusing on, the risk areas, and everybody will then understand why all these things are happening. At the end of the day, it's protecting them and the company's name. So for me, the internal audit is definitely also something supporting building the food safety culture.
Absolutely. So if we say an external audit is a snapshot, an internal audit has to be a video. In other words, it's got to look at everything. It's got to be a live process. So where an external auditor will come in and maybe look at the training records for 5 people during the day. When I'm auditing training, I need to look at the training records for everybody. So when I go down to dispatch, I want to look at everyone's training records in dispatch, because I need to make sure everyone in dispatch is competent. We can't follow the same level of auditing. So the pedantic aspect means you dig much deeper than the external auditor would. Melissa says that she likes to do a mock recall at the beginning of the audit and then use that as her sample for the rest of the audit. In other words, she will take that set of documents and she will then audit every single process associated with that product. So how were the ingredients weighed out? Show me the ingredients, show me the scale, show me how you weighed it, show me the calibration of the scale. So you almost build like a mind map audit from each one of those records from the mock recall. I gave you a similar example with tracing forward or tracing back. It's amazing what you will find if you just look at what happened in one day in our company and look at that entire process and look at it in detail. Now, Adele's point, and she's given lots of great advice, but Adele's additional point here, Daddy, is, we're working in a remote world at the moment. So we're relying very heavily on, getting email confirmations of things. We don't always see our colleagues. Some activities are still happening, people working from home. But yeah, emails can sometimes hide stuff. Deli?
Absolutely. And emails also becomes a very good excuse. Oh no, my system was down. Oh no, it went to junk mail. And, those are all risks that you then at the end of the day have to manage and face. So, if it is possible to walk to the person and, literally see the evidence and fix it in that way, so much better. Or then at least, a phone call, or like you said, video, or anything that just makes it so much easier to secure that you've done that you've got the evidence of that corrective action is so important.
Absolutely. So the thing with corrective action is we can't take people's word for it. They tell me that the way to hell is paved with good intentions. I intend to do something, but I never get around to it. So we can't just take people's word for it, unfortunately. The last comment from Matthew. Matthew says, I didn't get a chance to put it on the screen. He was a bit late. But Matthew says he always suggests a monthly GMP and PRP audit. So he suggests that you make sure you look at the facility and the PRPs every month, but then you split the rest of the procedures and the rest of the parts of the system in over 10 months. So that way you can do a little bit every month, but if you're doing smaller chunks, you can make sure that you do it properly. You can make sure you do proper root cause analysis to implement the corrective action. So he's saying rather do it in bite-sized chunks than, like Adele said, try and do it all in a day. You can't do it in a day. Don't even try. You can maybe do a GMP audit in a day, but you can't audit every part of your system in a day. Rather break it up and plan those. And also Matthew's saying, make sure you have trained internal auditors, not just on how to ask a question, but also that they have an understanding of the things they need to audit. In other words, if I have to audit calibration, I need to understand what is meant by calibration. I need to be technically competent in that criteria. Otherwise, I won't ask the right things. And so therefore, I won't find the right weaknesses in the systems. So those are some really good pieces of advice from practicing auditors out there. Maybe you even know some of them. Maybe they've even come to audit you before. So I think that that gives us a really good basis. And hopefully some of the things that we've told you about will really help to strengthen your internal audit and to make them better. So before we close, let's ask whether any of you have got any specific questions. Is there anything that's really bugging you about your internal audit program that you'd like our help with? Go for it. We're going to unmute you and anyone's welcome to chat. So please do give us, some feedback. You can now unmute yourselves and you can now ask us questions. Please go ahead.
Everybody, this is now the time that you've got the opportunity to ask that question if you've got one, in terms that, you always feel like you can't ask the external auditor or you're not too sure. So now's the time. You can raise your hand or unmute yourself, like Linda said, and ask the question.
Oh, good. Go for it. I can see you unmuted. You can talk. Oh, I'm not hearing you, Albert. Sorry. Maybe type it in the question bar and then we can take it from there. Anyone else? If you're too shy, you can type it as well and then I can read it.
Oh, well, then it seems like everybody is on top of their internal audits.
We answered all the questions that they had before they even wrote them down. So
exactly.
That's all good. That's all good. Okay, everyone, it's been great having you chatting about our favorite subject of internal audits. We love internal auditing because we know that it's a way to improve the systems, and also very importantly, an internal audit always allows us to really help with solutions. I much prefer internal auditing to external auditing. So make sure you make the most of this really important management tool. Make sure you give management good internal audits, good reports to internal audits so that they can make the right decisions about the health of the food safety management system. Don't underestimate how important this is to top management. And also don't underestimate how important internal auditing is to your career, because it gives you an opportunity to show management your stuff. So make sure you always showcase how well you do this part of your job. For the rest of you, have a wonderful Friday. Have a great weekend. Hope it's really good. And I look forward to very, very positive feedback about your internal audit programs. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
Absolutely. And last words from my side, I would love to leave you with Benjamin Franklin's statement where he says, by failing to prepare, you are preparing to fail. Have a beautiful Friday and enjoy the rest of the day.